Welcome to another episode of Building Wealth and Mental Health. We have a special guest today, Eric Rodgers. He is a licensed professional counselor. I think his story is going to be unique because, one, he's a business owner, but he also specializing in helping men in minority communities. So I think his story, his perspective is going to be extremely valuable.
The more I know, the more money I can make.
Welcome, Eric.
Oh, welcome. Thank you. I appreciate being here.
Awesome. So the first question I want to ask is, please explain the organizations that you're part of, because it's more than one, and the populations that you serve.
Yeah. So the organizations I work for technically three organizations right now. Currently, I work for the Licensed Professional Counseling Association of Georgia. I'm the chief operating officer there. Interesting experience because I get to work with a lot of clinicians in the field, helping them understand the struggles that they face in the field and how to navigate those struggles and those challenges, whether that's dealing with the ethics, burnout, or is just getting rights as professional counselor in this field to provide the services that are so meaningful to the people we serve. Also, I do work for a company called Peak Development Group. We do a lot of trainings, skill development for clinicians. And then my personal favorite is my company, Just for Men Behavioral Health, which is a company where I created to really serve as a niche for male-centered therapy for men to really get therapy that's really tailored for them. And also in a space that's sort of designed for them, right? Not walking into a space where you feel like you're in a space that was more set up for maybe a female client, but a space that actually kind of represents them a little bit more.
I love that. And I hope we take a little time and discuss that a little further, because I think you walk into a space, and I also say the same thing about mentorship. A lot of mentorship programs are actually designed from sit down with a cup of coffee, which may be more suited for a female perspective. But I never thought about, how therapy could be set up to be more inviting to men. So I think that's awesome. So let's start from the beginning. Please kind of explain, your childhood, how you grew up, where you're from.
Yeah, so I'm from Milledgeville, Georgia, which is a cool little fact about Milledgeville, the original capital of Georgia before Atlanta. And I would say Milledgeville, but I technically lived in a small town called Haddock. And but I spent all my time with the school in Milledgeville. And a thing that was interesting about my upbringing is, one is my father, he caught a disease while in the military. So for probably from the age of maybe 3 to 5, he was either on a cane or fully handicapped for most of my life as a kid. So I learned to be a caretaker at a young age, performing tasks for him that most people don't perform unless they're working in a nursing home or dealing with, those type clients. But I, at maybe 6 or 7 years old, was performing those tasks. And that was a very interesting upbringing. It did teach me a lot of things, right? It taught me how to respect individual differences, not see people through their disabilities, and understand that they're not what their disabilities don't define them, in a sense, right? And also seeing the strengths and the capabilities of people with disabilities. And I do love working with clients who, especially male clients who come in, kind of represent like my father in a sense, who have disabilities. But the other piece about that was kind of challenging growing up is, when everybody else could go to the party or go hang out or do all the things that they wanted to do, I had responsibilities. I had to come home early to make sure I can help him get in bed or help him take a bath, or, and it caused a lot of conflict at times, but it's not an experience I've ever trade. I think it was still one of the best experiences for me. And, but definitely a huge impact on my upbringing.
Any advice that you would give somebody who's young, let's say in their teenage years, that has to perform the caretaker role that you had to perform?
Yeah, I think one of the biggest pieces of advice is to find ways to connect with that experience, so that you're sort of harboring the anger that you have to do that piece. I learned to really see that experience as a way of helping me connect with other people who I think most kids did not connect with at that age. Uh, the other part about that is not getting caught up as thinking that the caretaker is your identity. And that part I did not realize until I got older, that I still had these caretaker tendencies that will show up in my friendships or in my relationships, because that was what I did, right? So I was always putting myself in positions of giving, and really learning how to pull back on that and set some boundaries, because giving was so easy. I did it my whole life.
So you went through probably more schooling than the average individual. So where was your guidance in high school as far as which college you go to? Who was mentoring you for that standpoint? Where were you getting advice about your career in the future?
Yeah. For me in high school, I didn't really get a whole lot of guidance on what to choose. I think my family was just, college was just something you do and you need to do. They didn't really care what I did. At that time, I was really big into like computer information systems. So I really thought that that was going to be my field. And turned out that I liked doing that work for me, but did not like the reality of what that job required. Working alone, I was very social. That isolates you from people a lot, that job. Then I went through a path of really trying to determine my identity, because no one told me in Milledgeville that, look at your strengths or look at who you are as a person, and find your identity and how that relates to your career. I went through, wow, so many career options and so many degree options before I finally took I took the first psychology class with the right instructor, and it just blossomed from there.
What was it about that class that connected with you?
I think for me was being that I did have a father who was handicapped.
Mm.
I saw what resilience looked like firsthand. I saw the pain and the struggles that he went through every day, while also getting up every day with a smile and a spirit to continue to live and have a meaningful life. And, when we sort of discuss those topics in psychology, that was when I realized, like, wow, that's what I want people to have a piece of, that you can experience all of these adversities in life, and yet you can still overcome them and be resilient with the right guidance and support.
Explain how college was for you, your undergraduate degree. What were you experiencing? What were you going through? Any tidbits you would want to share to somebody who was about to go into college?
Sure. I would say, being on my own experience, I would say be patient.
Mm.
Don't judge your experience by others. There was a time where, like, some people, they come into college, they found the perfect degree on the first choice and they were done. And here I am still sitting in college, like, okay, I don't like computer information systems, don't like law, I don't like I'm like, I'm trying everything until I found what I really wanted. But to realize your experience is your experience and is unique in your path. And you'll probably be much more appreciative giving yourself the time and the opportunity to find that space where you fit.
So I'm also from Georgia, and telling my parents that I wanted to go into psychology would be a challenge. How was it coming from your background, communicating to your family members that this is the career path that I've decided to go on?
Well, it was kind of met with a few pushbacks. One, you can't make money with a degree in psychology, especially when I was doing my bachelor's. So it was like, what is your plan to make money? Two, in the Black community, mental health is still taboo, and it's a lot of stigma associated with it. And to my surprise, there were a few people who really felt like it was going to make me judge them or think about the family differently, right? But I would still say, though, for the most part, I think most were pretty supportive, but I did have a little pushback. Um, I think if you have that challenge of family like pushing back, I definitely think you have to understand that feel and take the opportunity to really research it and understand what it is you want from it. Because there are some paths that just unfortunately are not going to lead to a lot of money, but they may lead to a lot of meaning and purpose in that work. Some lead to both, and then some may only lead to money. And for some people, they don't need meaning and purpose in their career, and that's fine. They find it in other avenues. But I just think it's having your personal plan in that field is going to make the difference.
So you're in undergraduate degree and you're faced with the fact that to do possibly what I want to do, I have to get a master's or go on and continue my education. What was your thought process? Did you consider how much student loan debt you may have to take on? Were you able to gain scholarship? What was going through your mind at the point where you realized I have to continue my education?
Yeah, I definitely I struggled with that because that even though you narrow down to psychology, but it's so huge. And even though counseling is not technically is a psychology, I guess, derivative in a sense, but it's not technically a psychology field. Um, it's huge amount of options you have once you start to realize it, right? Initially for me, I thought I was going to do coaching because I like doing the organizational development piece. And I went to Australia for a year, lived in Australia, did a graduate diploma program in coaching psychology over there. And actually, it was that program that actually helped me to understand how much I would really love counseling. Because in that program, we went very much in depth with solution focused approaches, CBT, and I learned a lot about overcoming adversities through that positive psychology focus there. And when I came back to the United States, that's when I realized I was going to do the master's, which meant here I am going back to school again to do something what I could have just did it the first time. But it it is, sometimes discouraging. But I will say, you can't cut corners in this field. If this is what you really want to do and you want to do it, you want to do it right, definitely go for your goals despite how long it may take.
Let's touch on your experience in Australia. Were there some cultural differences that really made you think about, wow, that's different from America, or I wish we did this in America, or I'm glad this is in America? What are some of the cultural things that you experience in Australia that you may use in your practice or just think about life differently?
Well, Australia was a culture shock for me. And initially, when I was thinking about, I just knew I wanted to get out of the country and experience something different. And initially, when I picked Australia as a place to go, I was just thinking like, oh, they speak English, so it wouldn't be that big of a difference, but it would still give me an opportunity to experience something mildly different. But the one thing that I did not plan for, I don't even think I thought about it before I left, was that was the first time I was ever somewhere where I saw no one that looks like me. And then when for at least 6 months, I think, there. And then eventually I started to see others, Black individuals, but they are from other countries, right? So they weren't Black American. So that was even a struggle in a sense because we still did not really connect, right? And, it was a huge experience. Even the jokes, like my jokes here were not funny there. I had to learn how to tell different jokes, and their jokes I didn't even get because they were based on their culture. So it was just simple things that I had to experience. Also, navigating life. Like here, I was the person everybody come to. Like I knew, like if you had this problem, if you was experiencing this, I knew everything you need to do here. Whereas there, every time I experienced a problem, it was like I had to be the one to ask people for help. And that was a huge shift for me as well.
So how did you decide which master's program to go to? There's so many different options. You're coming back from Australia, so you're probably not scared to move to a different state at this point. How did you
Right.
decide on your master's program?
Honestly, when I came back for the master's, it was more so for me, it was more so for convenience.
Mhm.
I knew I wanted to be in a classroom, but I really needed something that was convenient because I needed to work at the same time while completing my master's. So that's why I ended up going to Argosy for the master's at that time, because they had a lot of full weekend and evening options that really fit my schedule.
So you're finishing up your master's program, and part of that is you have to do, so many training hours. What was your strategy of getting these training hours or supervisory hours? How did you obtain those? How did you decide which ones to select? What was your mind process at that time?
Yeah, and that's the most difficult part, right? Because I chose this program for convenience. And one of the things they did not tell me initially is that, yeah, you can do all your classes conveniently, but when it comes down to your internship, that's where all the convenience go out the door, because I had this perception that I was going to be able to work, but when I got to my internship, I had to let my job go. And in order to complete this internship, because most places want you to, in order to get the hours, within the time frame, most places are going to want you there from the hours of 9 to 5. And all my friends who were doing like private practices were struggling to get hours. They were, having to do almost extra 2 quarters of school. So I ended up quitting my job and doing my internship, which was about 20 to 25 hours a week. And I had a little part-time work. And, but yeah, that was a huge challenge. I did my internship at Riverwoods Behavioral Health here in Atlanta. I chose them. For me, I wanted the widest experience possible with different mental health disorders. I felt like in private practice, you're going to always see depression, you're going to always see anxiety, and I could learn that the art of traditional therapy later. But that experience with the hospital, I felt like was just invaluable.
So you're doing your studies and you're about to graduate. When did it hit you this to say, I have a lot of student loan debt, and how am I going to address this level of student loan debt?
Yeah, I think once you graduate and then you get that little letter that's like I think it's a few weeks, maybe a month or so after you graduate, it's like, hey, you've graduated, you're no longer on deferment, and here's all your payback information, right? And initially it was overwhelming because when I first graduated in this field, and it's surprising how quickly it has changed, my first job offer was like $13 an hour. And I'm looking at all my debt and this job offer for $13 an hour, and they looking at me like, and we gave you extra, right? So uh, it was a huge impact, and I knew I could not survive with that. And it was also one of the most beneficial things for as pushing me to do what I needed to do in this field to make money quickly. And I fought hard to prove myself and took it serious to develop the skills, because I became like a clinical director before I even became fully licensed. And I knew I had to develop those skills in order to survive.
Let's take a step back. So, one thing about going to obtain your master's is a lot of individuals that you went to undergrad with graduate and are making a full-time salary while you're still in school. And that affects sometimes the dating dynamic. It's not, you can't take to an individual to a fancy restaurant and you're focusing so many hours on school. how did you approach dating during your graduate school years, and what were the challenges that you went through dealing with that?
Yeah, it was definitely challenging for a number of reasons, though. It was challenging. One, it was challenging in the sense that I didn't have the time, I didn't have the money, nor did I really have the energy.
Mm,
And as much as I may have wanted to, it was the few times that I was attempting, it was almost like, hey, you're distracting me, right? You're becoming a distraction. And I can't give you the time and energy that you are unfortunately looking for while I'm trying to achieve, and do all of these things that I think are meaningful to me. Um, and that felt bad. And I didn't feel like I had found a place where I had the balance. And the other part that was challenging is at that time, I was going through a major transition as I was going through grad school from being Christian all the way to becoming non-religious.
mm,
And that had a huge impact because now where I was used to dating women who were Christian and it was a great way to bond. We both Christians. Now I'm not. And then that created a huge challenge in dating.
any advice that you would give men who are in a graduate program trying to date? Would you say hold off? Would you say find someone special, still try to hold on to it? Because there is a time requirement. There is a energy and emotions. And it sounds like, and I'm sure a lot of people in grad school, you're still developing and figuring out who you are and what you value. So any advice that you would give to young men?
Yeah, I would say, if you found somebody that is uh, a great person that you really connect with, and especially if you were dating prior to entering grad school, I definitely think, it may be worth having those discussions around how do we set this up and make this work while we do this. But I definitely think if you do not have that individual yet and you're in grad school and you really, really want to take it serious, because it takes a lot of work to develop the skills that's needed for this field, I would definitely say be comfortable with the idea of potentially not dating while in school for that year and a half or 2 years.
So you decided, well, let's take a step back. So you were able to progress without getting full licensure, and I want to talk about that.
Mhm.
But what were you doing that make you progress, let's say, faster than your peers, or be able to increase your responsibility within the organization? What were the things and activities that you did to make it to that level?
Well, I think what was different, when I left work, I would write notes about what I experienced. The type of client, the case, what they were going through, and then I would go home and just pop open the DSM, look through all the research articles to fully understand what I was experiencing, so that I can bring it back to the organization and make changes and speak like a clinician. Right? When I first got to Riverwood, the first thing I noticed that was the psychiatrists and the counselors spoke very differently, and that there was a gap in the way that they would communicate. And I think it was just because they had different levels of knowledge that they understood respective to their careers. Counselors understood more about the dynamics of the human experience, whereas they understood more of the medical model and everything they experienced on that end. And for me, it was important to merge the two so that I could communicate effectively. And that was a huge, I think, factor in helping me move up fairly quickly.
So explain your journey to getting your license, because this is a key, I would say, economic point for a lot of counselors. Once you obtain your licensure, then you begin to make, I would say, a salary commensurate of the amount of student loan debt that you took on. So explain your journey to become licensed.
Yeah. One of the things I would say about if you're in this field, especially in counseling or social work or MFT, right, we have to do between 2 to 3 years at the associate level before we become fully licensed. And that first 3 to 6 months is great because you're just excited to be out here. But eventually you realize money, especially if you need income, right? And there was a times as I increased my income, was great, but I also realized how stuck I was because I wasn't fully licensed. When I didn't like something and they had given me a reasonable income, I could not just be like, let's look for something else, right? Or even explore other options. It became like a prison almost. Is that, yes, I've achieved this money, but I'm still not happy with the work that I'm doing. And there are no options because I don't have that fully licensed. And I think, if you're not careful, that process can be one of the most discouraging processes you can ever experience. The other part about moving towards licensure, though, if you have a really good clinical supervisor, as you're learning and developing these skills, you spend a lot of time going to meet with somebody just so they can tell you how bad you did and how bad you did on your assessment or how this was wrong, right? And like weekly, that's what I was doing. Like, okay, let me go learn what I did wrong today. And I'm like, that's not encouraging or building you up if you're not careful. And so my piece of advice to people is just really, exercise some self-care. Understand that you may find yourself in positions where you feel stuck. Really talk to your supervisors about it. But as I transitioned into becoming fully licensed, it was likely for me that I really worked hard to build relationships in and outside of the workplace that allowed me, not quickly, but it did allow me to be able to move at times so that I wouldn't feel as stuck and that I wouldn't be limited in my income.
So I work with clients where they're going currently through the stress of being supervised. And you mentioned something called self-care during that point.
Mm-hmm.
Do you mind elaborating a little bit more? What are some of the things that you do to be able to receive that level of feedback, especially at times where you may not see eye to eye with the individual that's supervising you? Any advice on that aspect?
Yeah. One of the things I did, I learned, I would challenge myself because I realized I may not like what I hear, but that doesn't mean it's not true. And I was getting more caught up on the fact that I just didn't like hearing it versus the fact whether it was true or not, right? And so I will always, ask myself, okay, yes, you can hate it, and I'm gonna give myself permission to hate what I heard, but is it true? And I'll always ask myself that question at the end. And if it is true, then I would do whatever it takes to rectify that issue or to fix it. Because if it is true and I really want to do well in this field, I need to address this. And I don't want to be stuck in a position to where I got to continue to experiencing the thing I don't like about supervision. Now, as far as the other parts of self-care in that position, I think also redefining what people think of self-care, because a lot of times people think of it as, I got to go to the spa, I got to go get, a haircut or do all these things that cost money. Whereas I had to learn free things to do, whether that was just going for a hike. Also during the day at my job, I found a nice spot at the company that I would go out there once a day for 5 minutes, breathe and kind of meditate a little bit and then come back in. Like I found my special zone at the workplace. It's those small steps that can go a huge distance. And even extra work was self-care in a sense. Like getting up in the morning, making up my bed and cleaning up my room before I leave the house, even though that's extra work. But when I got home in the evening, oh my gosh, it felt so much better to walk in that room in that type of space in the evening. And that was self-care.
So you're moving across your career. How did you decide the specialty that you wanted to work in? You received your experience, which was pretty broad. I think you moved to a couple of different organizations. How did you define your niche and where you actually practice and spend your time today?
Yeah. I don't know what it is about me and my life. I've always struggled to pick something, right? Like I couldn't pick a degree, couldn't pick a niche. it took me a moment to always do that. And I always had to experience it before it became clear. But I think as I moved through the different positions and in different workplaces, there was a few things that kind of stood out for me. From one was the male experience in the psychiatric hospitals to me was somewhat different than a lot of female experiences. I think there was at times I saw a lot more compassion and empathy for the female clients and the things that they were experiencing. Whereas even though this is a mental health facility, which was kind of sad, and this not just, and this is all of them, there's still a lot of staff that was not open to men being vulnerable and having these different experiences, and still sort of push this predefined notion what a man needs to be onto the clients, right? And that was challenging to watch. I think the other part about this is I realized it was a natural flow for me. It fit for me. A lot of male clients prefer to work with me. They liked the experience they had with me, and it was a natural fit. The last piece that really helped me to, I guess, make that final decision is that, they always tell you as you go through these programs, you need to experience it for yourself. And I was like, oh, let me go experience therapy a few times for myself on the opposite end. And I went to a few therapists. And the one thing that I always experienced when I walked in the room, no matter where it was that I walked in and there were like daisies and pretty flowers and everything around the room. And it was like really a space for that at that time, while men could potentially like the space, it just did not feel like a space geared towards men, right? You can tell that I was there to see a female therapist and this was her space. Even that, to me, when I walked in, I realized like, wow, I don't even feel in my space here and I'm at therapy. And that was one of the things I wanted to be a little bit different when you come in. So like if you come in here, you see a lot of things, and I try to keep it male neutral, right? In here. So not like a whole lot of sports, this or that. Try to keep it male neutral for all the different types of men, but there's a lot more posters on the wall that are talking about men in quotes and what they are experiencing. But that was a huge impact as well, just my own personal experience with therapy.
What would you state? Give your broad stroking opinion. Let's make it specific to the Atlanta metro area. What is the status of manhood and their mental health across the board? Like, where do you see us kind of trajectory going? Are we going in a good place? Are we going in a not so good place? Based off your practice, your experience, where do you see the trajectory of manhood mental health going?
Oh, I definitely think it's going in a positive direction. I definitely think that. I think more and more men are becoming open to being vulnerable and talking about their experiences and whether that's from childhood or in a relationship. And also, understanding that these ideas that were ingrained in us that defined who we had to be or who we must be, that you have flexibility with that. That is your choice who you want to present to the world, and giving them an idea that you can have an identity that's uniquely yours is becoming more and more accepted among men. And I think that's an amazing thing for the population.
Understood. So let's talk about drug usage, because I think that's one of the things you touch on a little bit, drug usage among men. And let's specifically talk about cannabis and alcohol. What is your perspective on how men currently use those substances and how it could be a hindrance to what they're trying to achieve?
Yeah, definitely, we always talking about coping skills and in this field, and everybody's like, oh, build coping skills. But guess what? Sometimes marijuana and alcohol is a coping skill. That is how they have, unfortunately, learned to cope with a lot of struggles in life. And so you kind of see that on that end. Now, granted, on another end, I do think, especially with alcoholism, that there is a disease factor to that, where sometimes people just take one sip and unfortunately they have a totally different experience with that than someone else, right? And they can become addicted.
Mhm.
But I would think one of the things too for men that is not really promoted out here is just not just the risk of becoming addicted, but the risk for further mental health disorders, right? We see the connection between, especially cannabis, and disorders like schizophrenia and bipolar disorder, right? And how that using cannabis, especially these modified versions, where the amount of THC and the amount of CBDs are so off, right? CBD is the protective factor in there. And you see these increases now and men experiencing symptoms of schizophrenia at a younger age, and they're becoming diagnosed with full blown schizophrenia disorder at a younger age, and especially when they're using using cannabis.
Very good. And let's talk about a lot of things. You talk about taking a walk in the evening. Let's talk about weight. Um, and I think that's one of your areas of specialties. Any advice to help men manage their weight? Because it is a struggle. We have time factors. We're working. We're also taking care of kids at times. There's not anybody in the home to cook meals as we may want or desire. Like, how do men manage their weight in this current society?
Yeah, it's challenging. One, I think, is acknowledging that you're not okay with it. I know for me, so I was before, like now, I initially weighed pretty much right at almost 300 pounds. And for me, I knew that it took me years to the point to get to the point where I actually felt like I really wanted to address it, and address it in a way that I just knew I had to. And but you'd be surprised how many people were just like, yeah, but you as a man, a woman doesn't want a slim guy. She likes a thicker guy and all of these, right? I love you at your size, but I'm like, but I'm not happy at this size, but everybody's telling me it's okay. And so eventually for me, as far as my own personal journey, I also had to understand that, and this is unfortunate for a lot of men that struggle with as well, we can have a lot of things that work against us. Your body sometimes just do not want to lose weight, right? And as you go through this process, unfortunately, your body fights against you. And, that's something I didn't know at a younger age. But I ended up having weight loss surgery, and then made some healthy lifestyle changes after the surgery to improve the weight loss, and been able to maintain that weight loss over time. But definitely think, man, it's okay to have issues with your body. If you're not happy with your body, it's okay to be uncomfortable with it, and do the things that make you feel comfortable. There's nothing wrong with that.
So explain your experience being a Black male in the mental health profession. It's already there's not a lot of us in the profession, because it takes getting a master's, which takes some type of economic support from your family members, which we don't have the liberty to have. And when you go to a conference, there only be maybe 4 or 5 of you out of 200 people. How did you experience going through the mental health profession as a Black male?
Yeah, I would say, like you said, it's very few of us in this profession. I definitely think as I met Black males in this profession, I made a sort of a mission to kind of introduce myself and talk to them more, and try to connect with them more, so that I can have those connections in the field. You're right. Like going to a conference, you're one in hundreds there sometimes, and there's just so many events. Not only am I the only male sometimes, but if there are other males, it's very rare that there's a Black male that's at these events. And I think it is sort of, I guess, sad. I think there's such a huge need for Black males in the field. You see a lot of parents of Black boys want to take their child to a Black male therapist, so that it can have that sort of cultural relation to what that child may be experiencing. But that's very hard, as also because a lot of so few of us, not many of us have worked with kids. And so that creates even further gaps in the profession, and not many of us are in private practice, which again creates more gaps for people to find someone that fits that.
So you decided to go out on your own, which is not for the faint of heart. Explain your journey of going out of your own. Like, what were you thinking? Who would I serve? How would I serve? There's also an income component. How could I charge? Go through the process of you going into business and then operating the business as well.
Yeah, I would say it took me a while to really think that I was going to do it. Initially, I was like, oh, I'll work for someone else and do it. But my true concern for men and what they experience out here in the field, and having someone who specialized in their needs, I just realized I would not be able to achieve that unless I truly did something on my own. And that was the primary reason for branching out. And it has been a great experience to do that. Initially, I was so worried about creating a niche around the group that's least likely to go get therapy, right? But luckily, like I said, I have another job that supports me. But every month, I'm seeing an increase. It's growing, and more and more men are starting to show up and be comfortable with the experience of getting therapy. And I definitely see what it can be and what it can grow into as I continue to work it.
How has telehealth been a factor within your business? Because I think that expands, your geographic development, where cities like New York or California, men may be more comfortable getting therapy versus in the South, where we may be more reserved from seeking help. So how has telehealth benefited your business?
It has benefited it some. It's quite interesting. Most of the men I work with really prefer to come in person, and they want to get that firsthand experience with someone. I do have few clients that unfortunately they just may be in other areas of the state where it's not a quick drive to come, and they do experience. I think the benefit has just been able to reach men across the whole state who are seeking a Black male therapist, or just seeking a male therapist in general who specializes in male issues, has been, the biggest piece that telehealth has brought to the business.
So this is going to be a tough question. So you work for the Licensed Professional Counselors Association. Give me your cultural opinion about licensures. I work in the industry where it's heavily licensed. We have to get license, certification, so on and so forth. What do you think about licensure in general, especially as a business owner? I think that has a different angle as well. Give me your opinion on licensures and how sometimes it can hinder minorities from getting positions, even though the purpose is to protect the public. Kind of strike that balance in that thought process.
Oh, yeah, that is a difficult question. I don't know if I've truly found where that balance sits. I think what I would say for most licensure boards that I think would be better if they had some type of program evaluation process or research process where they actually see whether the standards that they're setting affects all the cultures pretty much equally or in a fair manner. I think unfortunately that is not usually done. It's just we set this standard and then we kind of just move forward with it, right? I do think licensure is important because especially working at Professional Counseling Association, my connection to the protection that license provides to the public is very strong, because I've just seen so many horror stories and things in this field. But at the same time, I also see the flip side of how many people are struggling just to meet the requirements, and they're not But I think the biggest issue for the cultural perspective, though, is not so much the standards for me. It is the education that they are getting to prepare them for this standard. They don't have. I've noticed that a lot of them are coming to me with a lot more misinformation. They're more misinformed about the process. More misinformed about why you need to get that associate license versus sort of those who come to me who are Caucasian or other races, but especially those who are Black. It's just they didn't have the proper information to make the best decision that would lead them through a smooth process to licensure. And I almost feel like right now that is where I feel like I do the most good for the profession. They're just educating them on all the risk, the barriers, and the things that you should have been doing 10 years ago or 5 years ago that makes this process smooth.
Where do you think the best place to share that information? Is it first year in grad school? These are the career options. These are the licensure requirements. When should that information be disseminated to somebody who wants to be a mental health professional?
Yeah, I think that information needs to be disseminated throughout the program. I think, when you first start your program, realistic expectations about what it is like to actually work in this field, how hard it is actually to get a license and all the things that you have to do. Because when you first come to the door, they're talking to you about all your passions and everything that you love about the field. Very little about the things that you're going to hate about the field, right? And also, even though we have an ethics class, but I think ethics needs to be taught throughout the whole program, but also preparing them with scenarios and different ways that you're going to have to navigate this licensure process upon graduation, have tests around that, make sure they have competency to really understand that process by the time they graduate, so that it's clear. Because unfortunately, so many people are graduating not even knowing what the limitations of being an unlicensed practitioner are, what's the risk to the client. If they're unlicensed, they're just like, well, it's not required, so there's no risk to the client by me not being licensed. It's so much misinformation, but colleges can do a huge part. The other issue, though, we don't have universal standards. So if I go to an online school or if I go to a school outside of the state, then I'm really lost. So while we may ask the state schools to do more, but there's still going to be a huge population that are not informed.
So this is a episode on building wealth and mental health. So let's talk about money for a little while.
All right.
So what was growing up? How did you perceive money? I think they call it sometimes money scripts. What was your thought process about money growing up in Georgia?
Yeah, well, my parents, fortunately, they didn't struggle from my eyes a whole lot. But I did see a difference between my lifestyle and everybody else around me. And, when I came home, I was used to food being in the refrigerator. But if I spent the night at my cousin's house or at a friend's house, and you open the refrigerator, there's not much in there, right? And, really thinking about that huge contrast and the differences. The other part, though, when it came to money, was really understanding the balance between spending for pleasure and spending for necessity, because, especially with my father's experience, there was just so much money we had to spend constantly upgrading the house, putting a new ramp and doing all these things, and really seeing them having to always save for the next thing that's going to make his life easier, and how, little resources there are out there at times. And even luckily he got a lot of things from the VA, but even still there was so much more he had to do on his own at times to get that work done. So I think I kind of had a balanced perspective of money for, growing up. But I did understand that, because I saw what everybody else was experiencing, that money I just understood that, even just because you have it doesn't mean that, or just because you can earn it, doesn't mean that everybody has the same opportunity and that same smooth process to earning money like you. That there are real barriers out there for many, many people.
So when you obtained your first job, I think you mentioned it was $13 an hour. uh, was there any advice or guidance given to you about how you should manage that amount of money? And also as you grew in your career, like what were some of the tidbits and nuggets that you received about how to be responsible with money?
Well, luckily, my mom was really big on you prioritize your expenses. So which ones are the necessity and which ones are the ones that if you don't have anything that you can play around with, right? So I did kind of had a hierarchy for my expenses. Like, unfortunately, I knew if I had to choose between rent or lights, I always need to choose the rent. And lights might can get cut off if I never had that happen. But it was just one of those things I knew that you have to have this hierarchy. Luckily for me too, is I'm one of those people who's really good at sacrificing when the time needs to sacrifice. And during that initial period, I understood that I couldn't eat out. I understood that I had to cook at home and do a lot of things to save money to the penny. And for a good chunk of that time, I lived like that. Mm. I didn't want to have roommates, but I did when I knew I needed to.
Yeah, I think the concept, especially in the South, of having roommates needs to be doubled down because it's such a huge financial benefit of splitting rent 2 or 3 ways. So you decided to go out on business for yourself. Talk to me about the juggling act of, yes, you have a W-2 job, but you also have a business. I think you have 2 businesses because you do the coaching program as well. So how do you balance that money juggling act?
Yeah, between all the different companies and yeah, it is challenging at times. What I have done for me right now is that my lifestyle and everything that I base my living out of is pretty much from my income at the counseling association. And then everything else is either, is going to turn into some type of investment, either whether it's back into the business, go into savings, or something like that until these become what I want them to be and they're self-sufficient on their own. And yeah, and I think that has really, really helped, right? To, even though I make extra money, to not base my lifestyle off this extra money has been a huge factor in making sure I don't overextend myself.
At your current job now, how are, even in your business, because there are a lot of retirement accounts for business owners, how are you planning for retirement today?
Yeah. Yeah, and that's the other thing about this field too, right? When you first start off, you make so little money that is almost feels like it's not even an option when you first starting off, right? And I feel like I've just recent years got to the point where that became a priority. But for me, for as planning for retirement was a couple of things. One, I started looking into a lot of options out there, trying to make sure I was informed about this. I took a lot of classes. I treated it like a second education in a sense. And, even to my own understanding, to me, I learned so much about 401ks that I didn't know about initially. And I think that was also another thing that just affects, unfortunately, minorities hugely, with just a lack of understanding of what that really is and how it was truly meant to work. And, but yeah, and then also working with, accountants and financial advisors to really come up with a strategy.
I love it. Any advice that you would give somebody who just obtained their licensure, so they're making enough to consider and thinking about retirement? Any financial advice you would give them that you felt like was valuable to you?
Yeah, I would definitely say as you progress, this from my perspective, as you progress financially, you first progress into retirement planning. So as I progress and make more money, that is really money meant to go into retirement planning. So I'm progressing that first before I progress my lifestyle. Because you can get so caught up on advancing your lifestyle and not ever have the money set aside to really invest into your future. So I think your initial, advancements and additional earnings should really be geared towards that, especially if you make enough to survive, in a sense. And then everything outside of that, then you can start living additional lifestyle or increasing your lifestyle. To me, that is the biggest factor, is just making that a priority. We feel like we have so much time. We feel like we got 20 more years to go before we need to worry about that. But anything can happen at any time where you need to kind of step back and just want to be prepared.
So today you're working 3 jobs. You have your own business. What is next for you? What do you see coming down the horizon? Is it more of the same? Are you thinking about getting to some other endeavor? What do you think your future holds for you?
I think for me is really probably getting more into expanding on the training and development, hopefully expanding even these trainings around working with male clients. That would be one of the things I like to do, and do a lot more speaking around the challenges, in the public, around challenges for men and mental health.
All right. And for our last question, success means different things to different people, especially in this field, because this field forces you to think, what do I value? What is important to me? What does success look like to you?
Yeah, success for me, I define in 2 areas, and they both had to be achieved. Success, one, for me, was that on one hand, all of the things that I found to be meaningful experiences and the things that I want to achieve, that if I can experience just 1/3 of that in my life, then that will represent success for me. Like going to Australia was a huge success for me, right? That's something a lot of people don't get to go live in another country. On the flip side, I think what I experienced in my life as a male was that first time that someone gave me an opportunity to have my own individual voice and to develop my own identity as a male. The moment for me, I define success is as much as I can give that to other people, and I start to see other men experiencing having their own voice and their own identity in this world. That was my second way of defining success. And as long as those 2 things there, I'm fine.
Love it. Well, thank you very much for joining this episode of Building Wealth with Mental Health. We're here with Eric Rodgers, licensed professional counselor. Thank you so much for being with us.
All right. Thank you.
I'm gonna be really, really rich.